Science and the Challenge Club, Islam and the Student Scholarly Forum. As long as recorded history, there's always been an interest in religion and the differences among them. But since 9/11, there's been a renewed interest in Islam, and there have been certain myths that have been posed as questions. And so we have a very special panel here for you today that will help address some of those myths. And with that, I'd like to introduce Professor Melch. Professor Melch.
Thank you, Fred. As you can see from the slide, we're going to have a little introductory comments from Dr. Ali from UCR. About 2 months ago, I had the pleasure of hearing him in a broader panel discussion on teaching Islam. And immediately he stood out to me as an outstanding expert, which I should bring to MSJC. If any of you have had a chance to see his bio, he's an assistant professor of religious studies at UCR. He teaches a variety of courses. He is knowledgeable in all aspects of Islam. And so ideally, he is the best person to kick off and keynote our discussion. So it's my pleasure to present Dr. Muhammad Ali.
Thank you very much for that kind of introduction, Professor Alts. And thank you for having me in this college. It's been a pleasure to come here. And I'm just going to give some overview about Islam in the United States. So, and we have panels, so also we'll address some of the questions of Islam in general and Islam in the United States. First of all, if we have to start about Islam in the United States, you cannot start Islam in the United States without talking about Islam in general. But first of all, I think I would like to see everyone, having these pictures. First of all is the Quran. The Quran means the recited one. This is recited, but also oral. So you have recited as a text, but also oral, and I think there will be a discussion about that. You have here pictures of faces of so-called Muslims in America. Some of the faces that you might know, right? Let's say this is the Muhammad Ali, not me. But and you have other faces, and you have one of the congressman, the first Muslim congressman, for example, Ken Allison, 2006. So I just need to give a sense of very much high-profile figures in the United States. Second is the Q, the Kaaba. It's called the Q, or in Arabic it's Kaaba. So this is a symbol of unity of Muslims around the world, including in the US. So everywhere Muslims would pray in the direction of this Kaaba in the city of Mecca today. Roughly speaking, there are about 1.3 or 5 billion Muslims around the world, and you have Christians 2.1 billions around the world. So many. And in the United States, you have about 3 to 7 million Muslims in the United States. So about 1% only out of the total population of the United States. What is Islam? Islam is not the religion of Muhammad. Islam is religion with Muhammad as the last messenger, and he considered himself as the last prophet in the series of prophets before him. So including Moses, Jesus. So Muslims would believe that Moses, Jesus were all the apostles of God or prophets of God. That's why you have Abraham as the main figure across these religious traditions. So you have Abraham. That's why you have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as Abrahamic religions, for example, right? Because they all have Abraham as the patriarch. Meaning Abraham was the first monotheist who believed in one God, and you have different manifestations of this belief in history. Second of all, and this is according to the Quran. The Quran is the first source of Islam. And the second source of Islam is the Sunnah, or the tradition of Muhammad. It's called the Hadith, as the sayings and deeds of Muhammad. One of the Hadiths that give you a sense of what Islam is this one. And I'm sure that they will talk about this. Islam is to proclaim that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger, to pray, to give alms, to fast, and to fulfill pilgrimage to Mecca. So this is called 5 pillars. And they will explain about this later on. I'm just saying that the Quran and the Sunnah are considered the sources of Islam in general, including Muslims in the United States. Two things that become the two factors that make Islam present in the US. One is immigration, second is conversion. Okay. Immigration, you have people from Africa. First of all, Muslims come to some part of the United States. One of the earliest immigrants were including probably Columbus. There are some Muslims also accompanying Columbus, for example, in the 15th century. Some say they might be more before Columbus, but we don't have historical record about that. What we do have, historians try to find, is 18th century, 19th century, that you have some references to Muslims, early Muslims. For example, in prison, for example, or in houses that owned by, at that time, Protestant. Okay, you have this one of the pictures of the early Muslims coming to the United States. Second one is conversion. Conversion meaning you have indigenous peoples in the US convert to Islam instead of migrating from other countries. So one of the earlier 19th century converts was Alexander Russell Webb. Alexander Webb was Catholic, and he converted to Islam. And what he saw at the time was that Islam taught him equality. That's what he emphasized. He thought that Islam was an alternative to white religion at that time, okay, according to his perspective. All right. So Webb became a representative of Muslim in the World Parliament of the first meeting of world religions in Chicago, 1893. So he represented a Muslim at that time. Second, if you know Malcolm X, he was also a convert to Islam. Okay, he was just nobody at the time, but then he converted to Islam from the Nation of Islam and then to the Sunni Islam. Meaning, after he went to the pilgrimage to Mecca that I mentioned before, he became more into the mainstream Islam around the world instead of the Nation of Islam, who at that time was whose rhetoric was more anti-white, anti-Protestantism, and so forth and so on. Okay, so you only have about 25% converts in general, 23%. So mostly immigrants. Okay. All right, I have very small, and you have mosque. Yeah, mosque is like church or synagogue or temples, but mosque is quite different from other religious houses. Because in mosque, people can have different activities, not only religious observations, not only religious activities, but social, sometimes political activities also help in mosque. You have about 2,000 mosques in the US. And this mosque, most of these mosques were built after 1990s. Okay? After 1990s, you have the rise of the building of mosques. This is quite interesting. Why after 1990s, right? You have, especially in California and New York, there are two states that you have more mosques compared to other states. California, Los Angeles, and you have New York. Because you have many immigrants. They come from different ethnic groups. And they also have different denominations, Sunni, Shiite, and Ahmadiyya, and so forth and so on. So they wanted to create their own mosque. And interestingly, some mosques only speak different, their own local languages, like mosque only in Urdu language, or in Indonesian language, or in, Arab language, and so forth. So you have people wanting to create mosques because they speak different languages. They want to have a shared language. But of course, they do it in Arabic, apart from the local languages. By ethnicity, Muslims are divided into, in general, South Asian, from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, mostly South Asian. And you have African American, about 25%. You have Arab, 26%. Okay? From this statistic, don't associate Islam with Arabs. Okay? Right? Because it is quite misrepresentation of Islam, because even today, around the world, there are only 20% Muslims speak Arabic. Right? Only 20%. So most Muslims don't speak Arabic. They try to learn Arabic because they need to, but they are not Arabic-speaking people. But they convert to Islam, they learn Arabic, and so forth and so on in their schools, mosques, and so on. Okay? So you have this statistic. All right? Next, according to religious denominations, most Muslims today around the world are Sunni. about 85%. 15% are Shiite and others as well. So Sunni are everywhere, but Shiite are mostly in Iran. In Iran, it's called for the Shiite. And you have Iraq and half-half. Yeah, Iraq is Sunni and the Shiite. In the US, it's quite interesting. In the US, you have 50% Sunni, 16% Shiite, and 22% they don't consider Sunni or Shiite. So not affiliated, don't care about Sunni and the Shiite thing. Okay? Because they are born here and they don't see that significant, these differences. Because Sunni, Shia, well, that's outside. In the US, you don't need to, for example. So 22% non-affiliated, and 16% they don't care. I mean, they don't know whether they are Sunni, whether they are Shia, and so forth. Okay? This is Muslims in America. Very diverse, very diverse. Okay. You have organizations also. There are many organizations that represent Muslims in the US, especially after 1960s. After 1960s, you have organization, Muslim Student Association 1963, for example. Okay? Muslim Student Association. And you have now different Muslim association. I don't want to go into one by one. Okay? Just give a sense, there are many Islamic organizations in the US. How much time I have? 5 minutes maybe. Interestingly, Islam in Europe and Islam in America are quite different. In Europe, many Muslims are low income, have low income, generally uneducated and so forth. In the US, Muslims in general are mainstream and middle class. In other words, they are educated. They go to schools, they become college students, and they are professionals, doctors, engineers, and so forth and so on. So Muslims in the US, even though they are small, they are mainstream politically. In other words, they are either Democrat or Republicans. Okay? When George W. Bush, ran for president, about 60% Muslims supported George Bush, for example. After he had the war on terror, then Muslim support for him declined rapidly. So in other words, Muslim political affiliations depends on politics. There is no static way of how, whether they're Democrat or Republicans or even independent, for example. Okay, so that's and 15% Muslims serving U.S. armed forces. 15,000 Muslims by 2005 serving U.S. armed forces. Right, so they are part of the armed forces as well. And of 50,000 higher income, that's quite interesting. And of course, they start after 9/11, outreach programs, interfaith dialogue, open mosque day, iftar, for example. Iftar is the breaking of the fast during the month of Ramadan. They invite Muslim and non-Muslim to participate. So more and more programs like that. According to Wall Street Journal editorial, American Muslims are role models both as Americans and as Muslims. Role models. Because they are engaged socially, they are engaged politically. They wanted to be part of the society, they wanted to contribute to the well-being of the people, and so forth and so on. So you have this according to 2005 Wall Street Journal. 93% Muslims in America consider themselves loyal to the United States. Okay? This is against the myth that being Muslim means being anti-American or being, disloyal to American Constitution and American citizenship and so forth. So according to the poll 2011, 93%. This is very significant number how Muslims consider themselves in relation to American Constitution. I think I should, this is one of the last slide I have here. So you have Muslims in America facing some challenges, internally and externally. Internally, education. Yes, they are educated, civil engineers and so forth and so on, but they still need Islamic education because they don't have yet, for example, enough Islamic schools or even colleges or universities that combine Islamic sciences and secular sciences. So this is one of the challenges. The second one is civic engagement. In other words, they're not supposed to be underground. You see, there are some Muslims, claim them they are Muslims, who are driven to terrorism. Okay, this is a fact. It's not a myth. This is a fact. But these people, they do this because they are not part of the mosque, or they are not engaged with society. They are frustrated. They are separate from families and mosques, from imam and so forth, and they're driven to Afghanistan and to other places, conflict areas. They come back to here and then they become, they do something, and we know that. But this is not representative for Muslims, a majority Muslim in America. Okay, this is very handful of people who are not educated enough about Islam itself, and the imams have to, to attract them how they can come to the mosque and so forth and so on. Externally, there are, of course, you have Islamophobia. This is a new term, Islamophobia, but it has a long history of European perceptions of Islam. Yeah, European perception of Islam is that Islam is a heresy of Christianity. That's long, after the Crusade, Islam is heresy. And secondly, Muhammad simply wasn't, he suffered from epilepsy, for example. That he was inspired by Satan, by devil, for example. So this kind of perception had been there even before 9/11, right? So, but after 9/11, this perception come again into the surface, and Muslims now in the position to defend themselves. That no, for example. So this is quite, interesting phenomenon. But this is one of the challenges that Muslims have to face. About 6 in 10 American adults see Muslims as being subject to discrimination, more than Mormons, atheists, and Jews. So, it is quite interesting statistic here. In 2009, 1/4 of the religious discrimination claims filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission also is about Muslim discriminations. Okay, so this is the challenges that Muslims are facing today. This is the last. Yeah, you have here advertisement on jihad. Okay, quite interesting. I just want to give you here, in any war between the civilized man and the Safars, support the civilized man. Support Israel, defeat jihad. This is one of the, you see the transit system in New York and San Francisco, just recently. But you have, because it's a civilized way, in other words, they don't use violence, you have this alternative by non-Muslims who say, in the choice between love and hate, choose love. Okay? So you see this contestation of this is against Islam, this is Islamophobia. You have non-Muslim who also wanted to refute this Islamophobia. Not Muslim. This one is not sponsored by Muslims, but by non-Muslim who feel like this is, against American citizenship. Another one is here, love your Muslim neighbors. This is also not by Muslims. Okay? In other words, non-Muslims, many non-Muslims also wanted to support Islam or Muslims in the United States, that they are part of America. In other words, Islam has become part of America, and most American Muslims want to contribute to the society as much as they can. Thank you so much.
One thing parenthetically before we move on to part 2 is, could you email me this presentation?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I will.
A natural stopping off point or going on point from this particular presentation is the explosion of myths. We asked for students and instructors to submit what they believe to be the 10 most critical myths about Islam. And so we'll have a student monitor for this section, Mohammed Salat, who will introduce the 2 speakers and the questions that they will respond to. And if time permits, we'll take your questions.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You guys don't look very tired and sleepy today. No, so I'm gonna wake you up. Hopefully. Well, greetings and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum. Peace upon you. Thank you for all the guys for making the time to come to this event. I would like to thank Mr. Eric, Dr. Shaitman, Mr. Malch, and the Challenge Club and the Political Science Club for making this event happen. My name is Mohammed Salahat, and the people who are with me today are here to explain the meaning of the word Islam is, and they make it clear to you, audience, what is Islam is. We have today Brother Suhail. He is a friend of the family. He is he's a part of the Islamic Center of Temecula Valley. We have Brother Majid. He is a student of this MSGSE, and he is he's transferred to UCSD. For electric engineering. He's a member of Phi Theta Kappa, as well as what is it?
Yeah.
What is it?
Alpha Theta.
Mu Alpha Theta. So I can say that's a little hard for me. And also he's a secretary for the Islamic Center of Temecula Valley. But sadly today I called a person from CARE. She cannot be attended today. She went to the wrong campus. So I apologize for that. And myself, as I told you before, my name is Mohammed Salahat. And currently I'm an MSJC student. I was former president for the Challenge Club, former senator for SGA, as known as the Student Government Association. Now, the order that we're going to have today, Brother Suhail will come up first and then explain what Islam is all about. Then Brother Majid will explain and show a clip about the Muslim faith. Then myself, and I will explain about the women's rights in the Islamic religion. Okay? And let's give a warm hand for Brother Suhail first.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm a Muslim. That's how I identify myself. And my name is Suhail Ferris. I am a Palestinian American who came to this country about 17 years ago. I had the honor and the opportunity to grow up with Christians and Jews, being raised under the Holy Land. I also had the honor to speak the Arabic language, and I have the honor to learn the Hebrew language. Before we take it any further, I would like to say that none is worthy of worship and devotion except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I bear witness that Muhammad is his last and final messenger. And I also would like to say that whomever Allah guides, no one can misguide. And whomever Allah misguides, no one can guide. I would like to thank everybody in this room, and special thanks for Professor Melch for triggering and initiating this event, because as we as Muslims, sometimes we feel we left behind when it comes to the media and having a chance to present our faith and express ourselves. Example of that, after 9/11, the American Muslim community put a lot of money and a lot of effort in a sitcom show called Little Mosque on the Prairie, and it was a really show intended to diffuse and advocate the true image of Islam versus Islamophobia. And no media outlet in the United States would broadcast that show, so the Muslim Americans ended up broadcasting the show on a Canadian network. So having this gathering is a true opportunity for us to present ourselves, to present our faith, and to talk about what Islam is all about. And I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for making this happen, and I thank Him for using all of us, including Professor Melch, to make this happen. It's an honor and a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who is this Allah I'm talking about and I started with? Allah is one, and He is the creator and the sustainer of the earth and heavens. And Allah is an Arabic word. And this is not something new. Allah had a name in the Old Testament, in the Torah it's called Elohim. And He has a name in the New Testament called Eli. So if you look at those three names, Allah, Elohim, and Eli, they are very similar to each other, because the Arabic, the Aramaic, and the Hebrew language are very similar. They are sister languages, and they overlap in very different areas. This word God that we use nowadays I looked it up many times. There's many different theories about it, and I really could not come up with a solid, coherent argument to where this word God came from. So for a true Jew, he's Elohim. For a true Christian, he's Eli. For a true Muslim, he is Allah, and they're similar because the languages are sisters. This is the definition of God and who is God. We strongly believe that God is one. The core message of Islam is the oneness and the unity of God. And everything within the framework of Islam evolves around this unity and the oneness of the Creator. What is Islam? Islam in the Arabic language, a lot of people think Islam is a noun, is a name of a religion. In fact, it's not, it's a verb. In the Arabic language, it's taken from the source juhd. It's bending the effort to do something, striving to do something, then that's what Islam. Islam, the definition of it in the Arabic language is submission and surrender with obedience and sincerity to Allah, the One, the Creator and the Sustainer of the universe. This message of submission and surrender with obedience and sincerity is the message of Adam, is the message of Noah, is the message of Jesus. He said, I submit to you. Is the message of Moses, is the message of all religions. Therefore, Islam is not a new religion. Islam is just the revival of Christianity, is the revival of Judaism. When Adam came with the message of submission, some people followed, some people deviated. Then it's time to renew the message, it's time for a new messenger. And this process kept on going until it reached Prophet Muhammad, who took the torch from Jesus, after Jesus took the torch from Moses, and after Moses took the torch from the prophet that's before him. So the message is the same, the prophets are different, but God is one God, one message, different prophets. This is what Islam is all about. In the Arabic language, we have suffix and prefix, just like the English language. You know, we say like walk, walker, talk, talker, teach, teacher. We have the same thing in the Arabic language. We have mo at the beginning of the verb that works like the er at the end of the verb in the English language. You say talk, talker. You say Islam, you say Muslim. You add the mo to it, it becomes the one who submits. So saying a Muslim in the Arabic language, like saying an Islamer in the English language. Who is Muhammad? Muhammad is the final and the sealer of all of the prophets. Muhammad was born in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, that's where the monotheistic religions started. That's where Abraham and his wives and his children lived and preached the message of submission and surrender to God. And Muhammad comes from the descendants of Ishmael. Prophet Abraham married two wives. He had a Jewish wife, Sarah, and from her he had Isaac, Jacob, Benjamin, and the rest of the Jewish prophets. And from his second wife, Hagar, he had Ishmael, and from Ishmael came Muhammad. So that's where Christianity, Judaism, and Islam meet in Abraham. Because Muhammad comes from Ishmael, and the rest of the prophets come from the second child, from his second wife, which is Sarah. That's where religions meet together. In Islam, there's the theory and there's the implementation. In theory, we have to believe in something in your heart and in your mind. In theory, you have to believe in God, He's one. You have to believe in His messengers. You have to believe in His scriptures, including the Old and the New Testament. You have to believe in the Day of Judgment, and you have to believe in predestination. In implementations in life, we have to do actions to implement these things. In action, we bear witness that God is one, and we make sure our life evolves around this. Second, we perform prayers. Third, we fast the month of Ramadan. Then, if you are capable financially and health-wise, it's a requirement to do a pilgrimage to Mecca once in a lifetime. And these are the things, and pay the zakah, which is the alm or the charity to the poor and the ones who are in need. Why there is so many misunderstandings and myths about Islam in this country? Actually, before I go any further, I would like just to follow up on what Brother Ali said, the roots of Islam in the United States. When you read history, there's many arguments that when Columbus came to discover this country, he left from Spain 4 to 6 years after the exodus of Islam from Spain, which used to be a huge civilization, advanced in medicine and astronomy and so forth. And many historians, objective historians, argued that Columbus used maps were made by Muslim scholars to make it to this country. That's one thing. The second thing I would like to bring your attention, the roots of Islam in this country also came through slavery. When you read history, 10 to 15% of the slaves who brought to this country by force were Muslims from Northern Africa and Abyssinia. And a lot of those Muslims were forced to change their religion, and they were the most expensive and the most educated slaves. They did not use them in the cotton field or on the farm. They used them to do house chores, do the homework for the children, or do the cooking or the cleaning and so forth. And they were very expensive because they were educated and they had certain knowledge that they could offer besides their manual or physical labor. Why there are so many myths about Islam and misunderstanding what Islam is all about in this country? Human beings inclined to fear the unknown. And if you don't know something, you always have misconceptions or fear about it. So some of it has to do with lack of true knowledge about what Islam is all about. It's the fear of the unknown. The second thing, Islam, you have to know it, and if you want to know it, you have to know it from its real source of knowledge. Our Prophet used to say, Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'na wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana. He used to say, which translates to, O Allah, teach us what we might benefit from and make us benefit from what you taught us. So the true knowledge is the knowledge that you benefit from. So in order to have a beneficial knowledge, you have to take it from its true source. And the true source and the coherent source of knowledge about Islam is the Quran and the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Because the Quran is the theory and the Prophet and his biography is the implementation of that theory. One time they asked the wife of the Prophet, she described the Prophet as a walking Quran. She said, if you want to know what's the implementation of the Quran, the theory, you look what he's doing, look what he's saying, look what he's doing. So he came to implement. So the Quran is the manual and the Prophet is the hand-on experience for us and the example to how to implement this theory. And this applies to any religion. This applies to Moses and the Torah and Jesus and the New Testament and all the scriptures. What has been done to clarify certain issues about Islam since 9/11? Like I said, we don't have the chance to be on CNN or NBC or the newspaper or something like that. But we being taken any chance and any opportunity that we get to present our faith. That's why I said this is a great blessing to have this gathering. That's one thing. We've been very active since 9/11. And we have an open mosque policy. Every mosque in the United States has an open door policy. Anybody wants to go to the mosque at any time, they are welcome to ask any questions they want. The other thing is, there's a lot of organizations that the Muslim community in the United States established after 9/11. And the job of these organizations, some of it is legal, like they take civil cases to defend Muslim civil rights and liberties and so forth, like CARE. Some of them have to do with funds and collecting money and to hire lawyers and so forth. Some of them as advocacy, they advocate the true image of Islam versus Islamophobia. So all these things have been done. And the Muslim community has organizations that are in a direct contact with law enforcement, sheriff departments, FBI, CIA, and so forth. So all of these, so we've been trying to use every room we have in this country to explain ourselves, to explain our true faith, to advocate the true image of our faith, and trying to diffuse the Islamophobia about our faith. Is my time up? My time is up, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And now Brother Majid will come up and he will show a clip,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Majid, and I've been a student here at MJC for almost 4 years now. Got accepted into UCSD to transfer for electrical engineering. So I thought I would talk to you guys about Islam, but I found a really good video that's very interactive and is going to benefit all of you.
So how you guys doing today when he's uploading the video? How you guys doing? Good.
video is by John Green, who wrote many books, and some of his books actually made it to a New York Times top list, bestsellers. And it's a really good video.
Hi there, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about Islam, which, like Christianity and Judaism, grew up on the east coast of the Mediterranean, but unlike Christianity and Judaism, it's not terribly well understood in the West. For instance, you probably know what this is, and what this is, you probably don't know what that is. Google it. Mr. Green, why do you think people know so little about Islamic history? Did you just ask an interesting, non-annoying question me from the past? I think we don't know much about early Islamic history because we don't learn about it. Because we're taught that our history is the story of Christianity in Europe, when in fact, our history is the story of people on the planet. So let's try to learn something today. So in less than 200 years, Islam went from not existing to being the religious and political organizing principle of one of the largest empires in the world. And that story begins in the 7th century CE when the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, a 40-ish guy who made his living as a caravan trader, and told him to begin reciting the word of God. Initially, this freaked Muhammad out, as you know it would, but then his wife and a couple other people encouraged him, and slowly he came to accept the mantle of prophet. A few things to know about the world Islam entered. First, Muhammad's society was intensely tribal. He was a member of the Quraysh tribes living in Mecca, and tribal ties were extremely important. Also, at the time, the Arabian Peninsula was like this crazy religious melting pot. Like most tribal Arabs worshipped gods very similar to the Mesopotamian gods you'll remember from episode 3. And by the time of Muhammad, cult statues of many of those gods had been collected in his hometown of Mecca in this temple-like structure called the Kaaba. But Arabia was also home to monotheism like Christianity and Judaism and even a bit of Zoroastrianism. So the message that there was only one God wouldn't have been like as surprising to Muhammad as it was, for instance, to Abraham. Also, and this will become very important, the northern part of Arabia was sandwiched between the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Sasanian Empire. And you'll remember, those guys were always fighting. They were like snowboarders and skiers, or like the Westboro Baptist Church and everyone else. At its core, Islam is what we call a radical reforming religion. Just as Jesus and Moses sought to restore Abrahamic monotheism after what they perceived as straying, so too did Muhammad. Muslims believe that God sent Muhammad as the final prophet to bring people back to the one true religion, which involves the worship of and submission to a single and all-powerful God. The Quran also acknowledges Abraham and Moses and Jesus, among others, as prophets, but it's very different from the Hebrew and Christian Bibles. For one thing, it's much less narrative, but also it's the written record of the revelations Muhammad received, which means it's not written from the point of view of people. It is seen as the actual word of God. The Quran is a really broad-ranging text, but it returns again and again to a couple of themes. One is strict monotheism, and the other is the importance of taking care of those less fortunate than you. The Quran says that the good person spends his substance however much he himself may cherish it upon his near of kin and the orphans and the needy and the wayfarer and the beggars and for the freeing of human beings from bondage. These revelations also radically increase the rights of women and orphans, which is one of the reasons that Muhammad's tribal leaders weren't that psyched about it. To talk more about Islamic faith and practice, let's go to the thought column. The 5 pillars of Islam are the basic acts considered obligatory, at least by Sunni Muslims. First is the Shahada, or the profession of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is God's prophet, which is sometimes translated as there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is Allah's prophet, which tries to make Muslims sound other and ignores the fact that the Arabic word for God, whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, is Allah. Second, Salah, or ritual prayer 5 times a day, at dawn, noon, afternoon, sunset, and late evening, which are obligatory unless you haven't hit puberty, are too sick, or are menstruating. Keep the PG thought level. Third, Psalm, the month-long fast during the month of Ramadan, in which Muslims do not eat or drink or smoke cigarettes during daylight hours. Since Ramadan is a lunar calendar month, it moves around the seasons, and obviously it's most fun during the winter, when the days are shorter, and least fun during the summer, when days are both long and hot. Fourth is zakat, or almsgiving, in which non-poor Muslims are required to give a percentage of their income to the poor. And lastly, Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca that Muslims must try to fulfill at least once in their lives, provided they are healthy and have enough money. And there's also more to understanding Islam than just knowing the Quran. Like Judaism with its Talmud and Christianity with its lives of saints and writings of church fathers, Islam has supplementary sacred texts, chief among which is the Hadith, a collection of sayings and stories about the Prophet. Thanks, Tom. Oh, it's time for the open letter? Magic! An open letter to the 72 virgins. Oh, but first let's check what's in the secret compartment. Oh, it's Andre the Giant. Did you know that Andre the Giant died a virgin? Is a fact that I made up? Dear 72 virgins, hey there, it's me, John Green. Did you know that not all hadiths were created equal? Some sayings of the Prophet are really well sourced, like for instance, a good friend or a relative heard the Prophet say something, and then it ended up as a hadith. But some hadiths are terribly sourced, like not to be irreverent, but some of it is like middle school gossip, like Rachel told Rebecca that her sister's brother's friend kissed Justin Bieber on the face. And the vast majority of Muslims don't treat terribly sourced hadiths as scripture. And the idea that you go to heaven and get 72 virgins is not in the Quran. It's in a terribly sourced hadith. So it is my great regret to inform you, 72 virgins, that in the eyes of almost all Muslims, you do not exist. Best wishes, John Green. One more thing about Islam. Like Christianity and Judaism, it has a body of law. You might have heard of it. It's called Sharia. Although we tend to think of Sharia as a single set of laws that all Muslims follow, that's ridiculous. There are numerous competing ideas about Sharia, just as there are within any legal tradition. So people who embrace this worldview were called Muslims because they submitted to the will of God, and they became part of the Ummah, or community of believers. This would be a good moment for an Uma Thurman joke, but sadly, she is no longer famous. I'm sorry for watching this Uma Thurman. Being part of the Ummah trumped all other ties, including tribal ties, which got Muhammad into some trouble and brings us, at last, back to history. So as Muhammad's following in Mecca grew, the Ummah aroused the suspicion of the most powerful tribe in Mecca, the Quraysh. And it didn't matter that Muhammad himself was born into the Quraysh tribe, because he wouldn't shut up about how there was only one God, which was really bad news to the Quraysh tribe, because they managed the pilgrimage trade in Mecca, and if all those gods were false, it would be a disaster economically. Although come to think of it, in the end, the Meccan pilgrimage business turned out just fine. So the Quraysh forced Muhammad and his followers out of Mecca in 622 CE, and they headed to Yathrib, also known as Medina. This journey, also known as the Hijra, is so important that it marks year zero in the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Muhammad severed the religion's ties to Judaism, turning the focus of prayer away from Jerusalem to Mecca. Also in Medina, the Islamic community started to look a lot more like a small empire than like a church. Like, Jesus never had a country to run, but Muhammad did almost from the beginning, and in addition to being an important prophet, he was a good general. And in 630, the Islamic community took back Mecca. They destroyed all those idols in the Kaaba, and soon Islam was as powerful a political force in the region as it was a religious one. And it's because the political and religious coexisted from the beginning that there's no separate tradition of civic and religious law like there is in Christianity and Judaism. So then when Muhammad died in 632 CE, there wasn't a religious vacuum left behind. Muhammad was the final prophet. The revelation of the Quran would continue to guide the Ummah throughout their lives. But the community did need a political leader, a caliph. And the first caliph was Abu Bakr, Muhammad's father-in-law, who was not without his opponents. Many people wanted Ali, Muhammad's son-in-law, to lead the community, and although he did become the fourth caliph, that initial disagreement, to radically oversimplify because we only have 10 minutes, began the divide between the two major sects of Islam, Sunni and Shia. And even today, Sunni Muslims believe Abu Bakr was rightly elected the first caliph, and Shia Muslims believed it should have been Ali. To Sunnis, the first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, are known as the rightly guided caliphs. And many of the conservative movements in the Islamic world today are all about trying to restore the Islamic world to those glory days, which, like most glory days, were not unambiguously glorious. Abu Bakr stabilized the community after Muhammad's death and began the process of recording the Quran in writing, and started military campaigns against the Byzantine and Sasanian empires that within 116 years would allow the Islamic Empire to go from this to this. His successor Umar was both an uncommonly good general and a brilliant administrator, but like so many other great men, he proved terrible at avoiding assassination, which led to the Caliphate of Uthman, who standardized the Quran and continued both his predecessor's tradition of conquest and his predecessor's tradition of getting assassinated. Then Ali finally got his turn as caliph, but his ascension was very controversial, and it ultimately led to a civil war, which eventually led to the emergence of Uthman's tribe, the Umayyads, as the dynasty that would rule over an ever-expanding Islamic empire for more than 100 years. It's common to hear that in these early years, Islam, quote, spread by the sword, and that's partly true, unless you are, wait for it, the Mongols. Actually, as usual, the truth is more complicated. Many people, including the Mongols, but also including lots of people in Central and East Asia, embraced Islam without any military campaigns. And in fact, the Quran says that religion must not be an act of compulsion. But this much is true. The early Islamic Empire was really good at winning wars. And situated as they were between two very wealthy empires, the Byzantines and the Sasanians, there was plenty to fight for. The first of all were the Sasanians, the last non-Muslim successor to the Persian Empire. They were relatively easy pickings because they'd been fighting the Byzantines for like 300 years and they were super tired. Also, they had recently been struck by plague. Plague, man, I'm telling you, it's like a red tortoiseshell of history. But in those early days, they did pry away some valuable territory, like Egypt and the Holy Land, and then eventually they got into Spain, where various Muslim dynasties would entrench themselves until being expelled in 1492. But as good as they were at making war, it's still tempting to chalk up the Arab success to, you know, the will of God. And certainly a lot of the people they conquered felt that way. Wars in this part of the world didn't just pit people against each other, they also pitted their gods against each other. So while the Islamic Empire didn't require its subjects to convert to Islam, their stunning successes certainly convinced a lot of people that this monotheism thing was legit. Once again, John Green proving super hip to the slang of today's youngins. Also, you paid lower taxes if you converted, and just as taxes on cigarettes lead to people not wanting to smoke, taxes on worshiping your idols lead to people not wanting to worship them anymore. So in a period of time that was, historically speaking, both remarkably recent and remarkably short, a small group of people from an area of the world with no natural resources managed to create one of the great empires of the world and also one of its great religions. And that very fact may be why people of Western European descent remain largely ignorant about this period. Not only were the Muslims great conquerors, they spawned an explosion of trade and learning that lasted hundreds of years. They saved many of the classic texts that